Good morning, church. You know, some folks this morning complimented my bow tie, which is handy because I had already planned to talk about it today. This bow tie is actually a bow tie that I wore for the first time almost 2 years ago on my wedding day. And in fact, I hate to say this, but I'm pretty sure it's the only thing I wore that day that I can still fit into. My neck hasn't changed that much. Nonetheless, but you know, on my wedding day, I really wanted to look good. I'm sure, like I said, if you're married, you remember that. Like, you might have tried to exercise or diet a bit, and you just really want to look good for your future spouse. Now, the thing that I was, of course, worried about was like, am I going to fit into my suit nicely? And so I ate right, and I exercised, and I did all these things. And a friend was telling me, he said, Evan, you know what you always could do? There's this thing called Spanx. And they make them for men too. Now, for those who don't know what that is, and I hear some laughter from the women, it's more women wear it than men. Spanx is like spandex, really tight spandex, and what it does is it goes over those problem areas, we'd say, and it just holds everything in nice and tight. And so it makes it look like you're thinner than you are. And so I remember telling my friend, man, seriously, Spanx? And as soon as he left, I'm like, Amazon.com. Like, what is this thing, this miracle thing here that's going to make me look thinner without the work? And I order one of these t-shirts. It's like a tank top type t-shirt. And they tell you the size to order, and I get it. And it comes in the mail, and as I hold it up, it's this wide. And I knew it was going to be tight, but this is crazy. But I'm like, whatever, it's okay, it's my size, it'll work. And so, like, I wrestle my way into this thing. And I squeeze myself in, which, I mean, I'm talking like effort here. And I'm like, I just pull it down, and I'm in. But I couldn't quite put my arms down. Because all this has got to go somewhere when you squeeze. And so it's just here, and out. And I'm just like, this doesn't look buff. This isn't exactly what I'm trying to look like today. Now, I can see how it's a genius invention, you know, to hold it all in, to take all those things that you don't like about your body and just hold them in tight and make it look like everything's better than it is. So I have a question for you, church. Did anybody wear their Spanx to church today? Maybe not. But how about, if you'll go with me here, your emotional Spanx? Do you see what I'm saying here? The idea that we, because we're coming into church, we put our best face forward and we pull everything else in tight and we say, I've got it all together. I'm doing okay. And you come and you present that face. And so then during our greeting time, if people say, how are you doing? You always say, I'm doing fine, I'm doing okay, I'm doing good. Whatever your answer is. Now maybe some of that's because we're in the South. And that's the answer. Someone says, how are you doing? The answer is okay. The answer is good. But maybe inside you're not always feeling as good. And you know, this whole idea of having to have the face that we put on, really the mask we wear and present to the church, it's not unique to here or anywhere else. In fact, the sad thing is for a lot of people, that's what they think church is. It's the place where you act like you got it all together, even though inside you know that you're not okay. But not being okay is one of those things that it is okay to talk about in certain circumstances or with certain things, but it's only in the socially acceptable ways. So like we've decided as the larger church that it's okay if you ever have trouble saying, you know, I don't always love people as I should. That can be a bit messy, and it's true, and it's okay to say that. Or to even say, you know, I have trouble sometimes forgiving people. That's also been deemed okay. You're allowed to say that, and no one reacts weirdly. But if you were to say, I am really depressed, and I feel like I'm in this hole, and I don't see any way out, and I don't know where God is there. If people were to say that, that's usually not acceptable mess. And we might just slowly back away, say, I'll pray for you, brother, and just let that go. But it seems like a lot of times in the church, we tend to act like if people suffer from depression, that somehow they're lesser Christians. Because, think about it, we talk about the joy of the Lord is our strength, and that joy is one of the things that's supposed to characterize the life of a Christian. And so therefore, if you don't have that joy, what does that mean? Well, we even have those old hymns, I got that joy, 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 joy down in my heart. 4 times, joy. But why do we act like that is such a thing that we should never talk about? Or if you do suffer from something like depression, that you have to be able to just bury that and not think about it. And there are other things that we've said it's okay to be overwhelmed by, but not that. And the reason I say that, why do we have that thought? We're the church, people. This should be the place where you realize that it's okay not to be okay. None of us are perfect. None of us are ever going to be perfect, but we strive to be honest and authentic in our walk with God. And so, yeah, none of us in a lot of ways are okay. There are moments when we're less okay than others, but there's a way in which we're never all really okay because we're growing. And as I was doing research and thinking about depression and things to be able to talk to you about and really researching what the Bible has to say about this, I came across this one saying that I wanted to pass on because I thought it was awesome. And it said, the church is the place where it's okay not to be okay, but it's not okay to stay that way. I found as I went through Scripture study, 5 people that I definitely think suffered from what we would call depression today, and I want to look at 3 of them. I want to talk about Moses, Elijah, and Jeremiah. There were moments in their lives when all of them seemed to really struggle with what it was to be a servant of God. Moments where they all actually came to God and said, it would be better if I were not alive. And so to dive into that and to be authentic to where we are, whether you suffer from depression, whether you have a loved one who does, or whether you're just going through something or have ever gone through something that was just temporary for that time, there are ways all of this can speak to us. So our first reading this morning is from the book of Numbers, the 10th chapter, beginning with verse 11. Moses asked the Lord, why have you brought this trouble on your servant? What have I done to displease you that you put the burden of all these people on me? Did I conceive all these people? Did I give them birth? Why do you tell me to carry them in my arms as a nurse carries an infant to the land you promised on oath to their ancestors? I cannot carry all these people by myself. The burden is too heavy for me. If this is how you are going to treat me, please go ahead and kill me if I have found favor in your eyes, and do not let me face my own ruin. We'll take a pause there and continue in a little bit. Moses had had enough. Remember, as he's leading these Israelites out of the land of Egypt, through the wilderness into the promised land, these people constantly complained and bickered, and nothing Moses ever did was good enough. There were rebellions against him and his leadership. He would hear from the Lord and tell them, the people, this is how you honor God. And then the very first thing they do is then make a golden calf. I mean, everything that he did in so many ways was for these people, and it was never good enough, and that pressure built up so much that finally he says, Lord, if this is what my life is like, to look after these people that he calls a burden, and by the way, if you look through Exodus, he calls them that a lot of times actually, but he says, if that's all this is, for me to eventually see my ruin, just take my life now. You see that? If I can't get out from under this, if this is all life is, it would be better if I were dead. And this is what God says, starting at 16. The Lord said to Moses, "Bring me 70 of Israel's elders who are known to you as leaders and officials among the people. Have them come to the tent of meeting that they may stand there with you. I will come down and speak with you there, and I will take some of the power of the Spirit that is on you and put it on them. They will share the burden of the people with you so that you will not have to carry it alone." So what began to work to cure Moses of his depression? Basically, I'm saying he got the help that he needed. He came to God and said, "I can't do this. This burden is too great." And so what does God do? God, in his wisdom, says, "Take 70 elders that you know are good leaders, and I will distribute your burden among them." You know, so often, if we need help with whatever it is, we don't want to admit it. Or we want to do it all on our own, especially we men. I don't know if you boys, I know you're men now, but as boys, got the message from your dad, you do it on your own. That's what being a man is. That's what being a tough person is. You do it on your own. You don't need anybody, because needing somebody is weakness. And so we don't come to get the help that we need. Whether that's through community, as it ended up being for Moses, whether it's through the church, or whether it's by any other means. I think sometimes the help that some people need will be medicinal. I don't have any problem with antidepressants for folks who need them. Now, as my wife, who is a psychologist, will tell you, that alone isn't enough. You can't just take a pill and all life's problems go away. You still may need counseling or therapy to be able to sort through things, but there are often, in severe cases of depression, a real chemical imbalance, and I do not consider it to be any less Christian for a person who suffers from depression to take their medicine than I do for it to be unfaithful for a diabetic to take insulin, or for someone with cancer to get chemo. God has given us advances in medicine, and I think there are times when, in order to get better, we have to be able to say, "I can't do it on my own," and we get the help that we need. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing less faithful about that. Now, I totally believe that God is able to heal, and he may. But why limit the hand of God and how he can work by saying, "God, I'm only going to accept help for my depression if you heal me by your hand, even though you have provided other means to improve." And if you or someone you love is on antidepressants, I would just say, do they make you a better person? I mean, seriously, a lot of people I know who've struggled with depression say, "I'm a better father because of this. I am a better son. I am a better wife. I'm a better Christian." And so there is absolutely no shame in that. We should be able to be like Moses, to get the help that we need in whatever form that comes, whether it's through community, greater church involvement, being able to really be vulnerable with people in a close and tight-knit Christian setting. And that may be part of it even with antidepressants if that's needed. Because remember, it's okay not to be okay, but it's not okay to stay that way. That lesson could also be something that was learned from the prophet Elijah. Elijah was a great, great prophet of the Lord. And you may remember he's probably most known for this showdown he had with the prophets of this god Baal that had taken over, the worship of Baal had taken over Israel. Elijah was a prophet of the Lord, the proper God of Israel, the God of the universe, the God we worship here today. And his heart was devastated that so many of his kinsmen had started to worship this other God through the influence of the wicked queen Jezebel and her husband Ahab. And so there's been this setup to determine once and for all who is the real God. And he did this on top of Mount Carmel. And basically, just to really cut it short, he says, prophets of Baal, you set up an altar, I'm going to set up an altar, and we're going to pray to our God. And whatever God calls fire down from heaven to consume these sacrifices, that's the real God. And the prophets of Baal, they go through everything, and they're just dancing and chanting and doing whatever else, and nothing's happening. And Elijah actually mocks them. It's really, really cool. He says to him, you should call louder. Maybe he's asleep. And the idiom of the Hebrew that we often don't translate in our Bibles said, maybe he's going to the bathroom. Like, call for him louder. And they do. And nothing happens. And then Elijah makes it really hard for his altar to be consumed by fire by having all this water poured on it. There's so much water, it's like a little moat around it. And he prays, and the Lord sends fire down from heaven. And the people see who's the real God, and they slaughter the prophets of Baal. And that should have been it, you'd think. You know, the Lord won. Everything's over. Nobody's going to worship Baal anymore. But that's not what happened. And that's where our next reading from 1 Kings begins, verse 1 through 8. Now Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel sent a messenger to him to say, may the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them. Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there, while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. He came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. I have had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. Then he laid down under the bush and fell asleep. All at once an angel touched him and said, get up and eat. He looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and then lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. So he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. Imagine you're Elijah, and you have what should have been the greatest moment of your life, the greatest victory of all time, and in the end, all that work accomplished nothing. What did it do? Jezebel's still in power. People are still worshiping Baal. And now they're coming for you to kill you. And it all became too much for Elijah, to the point that he said, God, just take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors. Just take my life. But what did God do? God ministered to Elijah with this bread. Here's what I see that Elijah did to work on and to overcome his depression. He sought God more than he had before. Even as a prophet of God, he sought God harder than he ever had before. And right after this experience, he goes to the cave of Mount Horeb, and he has this experience where the presence of the Lord comes by and ministers to him personally. So here's what I see for Elijah. He spent time with the Lord himself so that God could tell him who he was. I think a lot of times, if people are struggling with depression, if they're really wrestling with things, there are a lot of voices they may hear. And they're the voices, and they often probably sound like your own voice, that are telling you things like, you're no good. No one loves you. You can't do this. Why are you trying? Give up. And some people listen to those voices. And so what Elijah had to do when he was probably hearing much the same thing is he had to go and be with God and on an even deeper level than he ever had before. But why? So that the Lord could tell him who he was. So that the Lord could tell him with an even louder voice than the voices he may have heard in his head that you are my child, that you are loved, that you are worthy. That this is all, in the end, going to be okay. I think that for Elijah, what he learned is that God has this way of working through our circumstances, through the things we're going through, to bring us to the place that he wants us to be. And I think that's definitely the lesson to take from Jeremiah, the last person we're looking at today. Jeremiah was a great prophet. He was a prophet that I'll tell you, I love his call story in so many ways. If you go to the first chapter of Jeremiah, God calls Jeremiah and says to him that he says, Jeremiah, you're going to be my prophet. And Jeremiah says, not me. I'm too young for that. Like, we're thinking he's probably like 14, 15 years old. And God's like, oh, yes, you are. I chose you. Before you were even born, this is the purpose of your life. This is what you're going to do. And clearly, Jeremiah must have been afraid because 3 times in that first chapter, God tells him, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of this. I'm going to protect you. I'm going to look out for you. In fact, I'm going to make you strong. He says, you're going to be as strong as a city wall. You're going to be like a pillar that is made out of iron. You are going to be a wall that is made of bronze. And so be strong because the Lord will protect you. And so Jeremiah goes and he preaches the message that God gave him to preach. But it was all negative things. It was never something cheery like, you're going to have a great day, guys. Keep at it. It was all like, the end is coming because you are not being faithful, and Babylon is going to sweep in and then take us over and then ship us out to Babylon. And no one wanted to listen. The king wouldn't listen. The priest, the people who were supposed to be hearing from God, they wouldn't listen. The people wouldn't listen. And people mocked him and hated him. And one day, he's in the temple, talking about this very thing. He's on the outskirts of the temple, but he's in the compound. And this chief official of the temple comes and he beats him up. And other priests join in and hit him and beat him and humiliate him. And then he's put in stocks outside the temple for a whole day as people could come by and mock him or hit him or do whatever they wanted. And when that was done, he was released. He said some not kind words, a little prophecy for the person who had started all of this. And then he talked to God. And this is what he said from our last reading of the day, Jeremiah 20, taking some verses from that, beginning with verse 7. He said, you deceived me, Lord, and I was deceived. You overpowered me and prevailed. I am ridiculed all day long. Everyone mocks me. Whenever I speak, I cry out proclaiming violence and destruction. So the word of the Lord has brought me insult and reproach all day long. Cursed be the day I was born. May the day my mother bore me not be blessed. Cursed be the man who brought my father the news, who made him very glad, saying, a child is born to you, a son. Why did I ever come out of the womb to see trouble and sorrow and to end my days in shame? That's intense, y'all. It is. Why would he feel deceived? Because the Lord had promised him, I'm looking out for you. I'm going to protect you. And what just happened? If ever there was a time when it's like, Lord, I could use some of that protection right now, it would have been that moment. But he got beat up and humiliated. Which I'm sure to everyone was a sign that he was not a real prophet, because God would not let a real prophet go through this. And so he says, you deceived me. It would be better if I had never even been born. I'll also say, just as a side note, I think it's okay to talk to God like that. Like, if you're having something that you're going through, you don't always have to pray these proper prayers. You definitely don't have to pray in the King James English of thee and thou and whatever else. Just talk to God. Tell him what you're going through. God can handle your complaints. I think God would rather you came to him in authenticity and who you are than try to act like you're something you're not. He knows it. So Jeremiah came to him in this way. Here's the harder lesson from Jeremiah, though. See, what God had promised. He told Jeremiah, I'm going to make you like a city wall, like a pillar that's made out of iron. You're going to have the strength as if you were a wall made out of bronze. But it's been my experience, and maybe your experience, that God has a way of working. And usually, the way God works is not like I Dream of Jeannie, where he just does this, doink, and now you magically have whatever it was you wanted. You know how you get that from God? A lot of times, at least, he guides you through something in your life, and he's present with you, and he lets you learn and develop and grow. And then you become the thing he told you you would be. God leads you through life circumstances to make you who you are. That's not to dismiss any of the circumstances. That's not to say that things you went through were not hard or not difficult or even unfathomable. But God can and does use everything. And I think God may lead some people through periods of depression to help make them who he is calling them to be. And he did that with Jeremiah. You know, there's this old saying where it says, so someone's being a Jeremiah, and it just means they're being like a person who's just looking down on themselves and complaining, you know, like that martyr complex kind of thing. But here's what's interesting. Jeremiah went through worse things after this. But this is the last time he complained. God made him into the thing he had promised him he would be. And I'll even say, I see the time. I'll just say I'm sorry, but I see the time. I'm aware. Holy Spirit does still speak after 11:30, I think. But just because I don't want it to I don't want to just go to the conclusion from this without telling you this bit, because I don't want to seem callous, and I don't want to seem heartless, and I don't want anyone to think it's easy for you to say that because you're up here. And I'll tell you that when I was in high school, my junior and senior year, I was really depressed for like all that time. I never saw anybody. I never got the help that I needed. But there were times my senior year when I very much contemplated suicide. And the reason I did not is because I loved my mother too much. And that was it. I knew what that would do to her, and I was not willing to, but I thought about it. I debated what would be the easiest, least painful ways, what I could do that would make it possible, because I just didn't see a way out, and I didn't want to feel what I felt anymore. I actually kept this. It got to a point that I didn't know what else to do, and I started writing down my thoughts. It felt like writing them down just to get them out, because if I could just write them down, it's like they weren't a part of me anymore. And I remember writing things about how I didn't want to die, but I just didn't want to feel the way I felt anymore. But for me, God met me in that moment. My story of becoming a Christian is not one that's filled with all this joy, warm feelings and amazing. Mine is one where I felt beat up like a wrestler had just tapped me or put me in a chokehold and I just tapped out into submission. And so when I prayed to God, when I gave him my life, I said, God, I don't want to live this way anymore. I don't want to feel this way anymore. So do you want me? I don't know why you would, but if you want me, then you've got it. My life is yours. And I went home and I didn't think anything of it. I didn't think, I became a Christian tonight, guys. None of that. But in my heart and in my life, God started to do something different. And I think God taught me the thing that I'm trying to really impress here, that it is okay not to be okay. But it's not okay to stay that way. And so we need to be able to have the courage of Moses, who can come to God, or in our case, come to others as well, and say, I'm having trouble dealing with this. And be brave enough to get the help we need in whatever form that takes. To be like Elijah, who says that I know I need to pursue harder in my relationship with God so I can hear what God has to say to me about who I am instead of all the voices around me. Or to be like Jeremiah, to say, Lord, I don't understand what's going on here, but I know that you're using it. I know that you're doing something through this. And to allow God to form us into the people that he's calling us to be. Because it's okay not to be okay. It is. But it's not okay to stay that way. Amen.